Hey everybody, it's John Krask with Every Library and the Every Library Institute. It's been Books Week 2025. We're having a lot of big chats this week. If you have not accessed all the recordings yet, please do. They're available on demand right away through Facebook and through YouTube at Every Library. The rest of the week coming up, big conversations as well about why we read, why we write, who are we as readers and writers, what kind of stories do we want to tell, and what are some of those barriers to accessing both the stories themselves because of limitations. It might be financial limitations, might be technology limitations, but also those barriers that come up around censorship and around erasure of access. So to that end, today we've got a wonderful chat scheduled with Carol Edgarian on a book set in 1906 after the San Francisco earthquake, a story about Vera. It's a story of survival. It's a story that I think is really fascinating because we always hear, Carol, about the earthquake as this cataclysmic event. In fact, I was watching something the other day that was it was Jeopardy. I was watching Jeopardy reruns, and they asked about like martial law being declared in 1906. Where? And I was like, I know, because I know about the earthquake. But these human stories, Carol, they're fantastic. Thank you for being here to talk about them.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's wonderful to be here. And you're right. I mean, I had come from the East Coast to San Francisco decades ago, but I had been collecting books about the 1906 quake. And of course, there was the quake, and then what followed was 4 days of fire. And it fascinated me always, this notion that within the space of 45 seconds, an entire society could collapse.
You know, I want to get into that, but I also owe you the courtesy of the official bio, Carol. Let me just read that real quick, okay? Carol is a New York Times bestselling author. Her novels include Vera, The Three Stages of Amazement, and the international bestseller Rise of the Euphrates. Her books and essays have been widely translated and anthologized. Her popular weekly Instagram series, A Word Please, and by the way, I like that that's the please is in there. You know, that's nice. Investigates the way in which words change to reflect the stories of our times. She's a sought-after speaker on such topics as the art of fiction and why stories matter. She's co-founder and editor of Narrative magazine and the founder of Narrative for Schools, whose programs provide free literature and resources for students and educators throughout the U.S. and in more than 55 countries. Again, Carol, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so 45 seconds, huh? That is a
45 seconds.
Short amount of time.
Right, right. And what interested me in, it's a great nexus for drama, right? You know, what happens after. Mm-hmm. And more to the point, who are you when society collapses? You know, I wrote a line in the book, catastrophe for many is an opportunity for some. And what guided me, I guess in my work overall, I'd say that I'm always looking for stories that have some kind of nexus between political or historical upheaval and characters bent on reinvention. You know, where social change and events allow characters to reinvent themselves. And the question for Vera, I wanted to write an adventure story about a young woman who is smart and contrary at a time when she was absolutely, even before a catastrophe, going against the grain. But also, I knew I had a story when I wrote the line, all my life I had been looking for a catastrophe greater than my birth.
Wow. Okay, so that is the framework around I didn't ask to be born, combined with the fact that an earthquake is as sudden as a stroke or a heart attack or a car accident. One moment you're walking down the street, you're sitting at a lunch counter. And then the next moment, it's literally falling down around your ears. For somebody to have, unlike a stroke, forgive me, not to be too metaphorical here, but there's paralysis and then there's action.
Yeah, I mean, and the 06 quake happened before dawn, so you're asleep in your bed. What do you do next? and let's say your house isn't safe. What do you take with you? Do you take the photographs of Uncle Joe and the silver, which is not going to help you in any way survive the next period of time?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you grab gloves and boots and food?
Mm-hmm.
And there was incredible photographs from the time of folks who'd taken trunks or taken their best rug and brought it up to a hillside, and there in the distance, John, were the beginning of the flames. And of course you're in complete shock, but also, what do you do? I mean, can you outrun them? What's the next thing? And more to the point for our story, and it's so interesting to me that you can write about a time in history. And I was writing this book in the nexus of the 2016 political world, because also what was happening in San Francisco at that time is the mayor was corrupt, and the arc of the book is the year trial when he was ultimately sentenced to San Quentin, and that's its own story that I only discovered and really hadn't been told. But what really interested me, and in this story, and I think probably in most stories, is who are you when no one's looking? Yeah. How does character reveal itself, and how do your actions reveal who you are?
There's an old Cockney, I think, adage, I think it's Cockney, about a man in a crisis falls back on what he knows best, a murder to murder, a thief to theft.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, isn't that a good one?
Oh, I love that. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And if the constraints of society have suddenly vanished, it allows, in this case, our young Vera to, she's both forced to create and survive, create a new family. And who are those folks? And there are, it was really important to me to show all the levels of society, including there is a Chinese servant, Tan, who starts out as Vera's nemesis. And this is a man who understands wines and art, and he is a butler in a grand house. He also is consigned to live in a basement with a dirt floor. And what happened to the Chinese in San Francisco in 1906? And all the levels of society. How in a given moment do people have the opportunity maybe to change? And
that's an interesting thing. Most of your work, or many of your novels, focus on survival in times of real crisis, war, upheavals, disasters. So you seem to be very reflective on human resilience as a writer. What have you learned about humans from writing these stories?
I've learned that first of all, what makes people tick? What is their wrong rightness? No one in life wears a white hat or the black hat. We're all a combination of things. We're complex beings, and my job as a writer is to show as much of that complexity as I can by putting my characters in moments of duress. In fiction, you only get what you want very occasionally, and I think fiction is most alive when characters want things and they want them now. And then my job is to thwart that in some way, right?
It does add intensity to the scene, certainly.
Well, I think, and I'm speaking both as a writer and a publisher here, I think for fiction to really endure, it has to have an element of reading as the news of the day. It has to feel relevant to our lives now. And what I started saying was, I'd written the book in the years leading up to COVID, but of course it was read during the pandemic. And what my readers told me is this feels so relevant to what we were living now. But I would also assert we're talking about this, and it's been a little bit of time since I've talked about Vera, it kind of feels relevant to now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I key into, and in part it's where I come from, but this idea that is, I think, particularly American, but also global, is this notion of displacement. This notion that so many of us are looking for home.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a prevailing feeling of there's been a loss of something really essential that makes people feel safe and protected in our society today.
I think about some of the songs that I love, some of the books that I love, and you have that longing of, in a Simon and Garfunkel song like America. They've all come to look for America, and there is a lot of come to look for America stories in 1906 in San Francisco that you touched on, and that identity issue. Some people left San Francisco in 1906 after the earthquake and never looked back. Some people stayed and they recreated that community together. It is not uniquely American. Displacement happens all over the world, but there is a unique through line to the American psyche. I think you're right.
I think it is absolutely something, obviously, that happens all over the world. Mm-hmm. I think we Americans aren't as we don't talk about it as much as we need to. Mm-hmm. I'm the product. Both my parents are first generation, mm-hmm. and so this notion of America, this notion of coming from another place, of being immigrant, is very close to me. And we could go way down the rabbit hole about that, but as we're talking about banned books and we're talking about voices that make up the American voice, it is wonderfully diverse and rich with stories from other places that we bring here and become part of the American voice.
So let me ask you one more question about Vera in particular. And I do want to talk about narrative and Narrative Magazine, I should say, and Narrative for Schools too. But was Vera based on a real person?
No.
Okay.
No, but I spent about 2 years researching the city. And the city is such a great character. Mm-hmm. San Francisco, we think of San Francisco as this shining, beacon that is always, where it's always too expensive. It's always, you think it began in the gold rush. It's mm-hmm. always been hyperinflation. And there's always been peaks and valleys in its story, literally in its typography, but also it's burned to the ground 4 times.
Yeah, I'm calling into this conversation from suburban Chicago. We have a real fire mythology over here too.
You sure do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool. So let me dive in with you about Narrative Magazine and Narrative for Schools, because the conversation around where are we at in America today, where are we at around the world with access, and this particular story of resilience, your other works that talk about that human condition and that human resilience. Does one follow the other? Does Narrative Magazine in your career follow your life as a fiction writer, or are these parallel efforts for you? Are you just a glutton for punishment and want to work all day?
Maybe all of the above.
Yeah.
Maybe all of the above.
Yeah. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about Narrative Magazine?
Oh, I'd happily talk a little bit about Narrative. Mm-hmm. So we began Narrative. We just marked 22 years, and when we started. Thank you. When we started it in 2003, it was really the beginning of the digital world. I mean, mm-hmm. the New York Times, the New Yorker, nobody was online. And we thought, the idea, and it started very small with no funding, we're a nonprofit, with the idea of if writers and writing doesn't get on board the digital train, it and they will be increasingly marginalized. So fast forward to today, and so the commitment that all of our content would be free, that writers would be well paid and well published, that we would discover new emerging writers, and that we would be supportive, reader focused, so that there would be, the idea was, the conviction really was that there would be no socioeconomic barrier to accessing great literature. And so there are 2,000 authors in the narrative library. And the Narrative Prize, which we award annually, we're about to award the 2025 prize, has launched the careers of Javier Zamora, Ocean Vuong, Natalie Diaz, Min Jin Lee, Anthony Mara, and so on. So to bring emerging authors to a global readership of more than 500,000 readers. And Narrative for Schools started 10 years ago because we were hearing, for example, that in Seoul, Korea, the narrative library was being taught as the basis of English literature.
So that's pretty cool.
And we were hearing from readers in Moscow and throughout Africa, because, of course, while books are harder and harder to afford, everybody has a phone. And if you have a phone, you have access to the entire narrative library. So currently, and so we started building free resources for teachers who really were using it we saw a spike in traffic during COVID. So today, the Narrative for Schools is used in schools throughout the U.S., every state, and in more than 55 countries.
The fight over the canon is always an interesting one, and the comparative literature classes that are out there for high school students, or whose literature, when was it written, in what lens, how much interpretation. You were saying earlier about the relevance of a story to today. I mean, half of learning Shakespeare is to understand the language enough that you can understand that it still is relevant to you today.
That's right.
Yeah, but a magazine like Narrative, and a mission that Narrative has, is helping to reset the canon, it sounds like.
I think I think the notion, I'm always interested when a friend says, oh, I read XYZ book, and then tells me that they listened to it on their walk.
There's that too.
But they still use the word that they read the book. And so for our beginning few years, people printed out the stories we published, and poems and interviews. The idea, I'm someone for whom the public library downtown really saved my life. I don't want the brick and mortar library ever to go away. But I also feel keenly, and there's a lot of research that backs this up, that if someone leaving high school doesn't identify themselves as a reader, we've lost them. So if they're reading, I was talking to a teacher recently who, inner city Chicago, tough school, who uses narrative in all his high school English classes. And he said, I don't have the books for the kids, but also if I assign narrative, they'll read it on the bus on their phones, and no one knows they're reading a book. They're, they're looking like they're scrolling on the phone. And hey, more is more. And we're battling so many headwinds. Let's give people a chance to read the good stuff and to find in it inspiration, and to be reminded of the essential human connection.
Censorship is an active campaign at times. Censorship is also these passive situations that limit access. It might be somebody making a decision not to publish, not to write. It might be a decision by a librarian not to collect. But it's certainly, there's forms of technological and access-based censorship too. Those bans that happen by the omission of literature in these people's lives. And I think that you've identified something very powerful over these last 22 years, which is that democratization, small d democratization of access, improves somebody's ability to engage, to be a little more literate in the classic sense, and to have that world broadening that comes from diverse voices of authors. I think it's really a very smart approach. It's pro-access, but it's also anti-censorship, I think.
Absolutely. And we have a whole banned book, a banned author section of the library. So, the library is so big. We try, you can search it by theme. You can search it by kinds of stories, kinds of poetry, interviews. We also, for Narrative for Schools, we run a high school writing contest that's international. And I will mentor the winners. And we have, it's been my privilege to talk to kids from Pakistan, from Taiwan, from, around the world, but also to talk to kids who are newcomers to the States who are writing poetry. And John, they're damn good. They knock me out, these high school kids. I put them up against some of our best poets. And that's amazing. That's amazing. That if you can give, I was talking to a writer whose parents cannot read, but who is writing poetry. And he and a group of 3 friends, a couple times a week, read their poetry to each other. These are nerdy kids who wouldn't have any other access to, to finding place, finding connection. Our enemy is ignorance and cynicism.
Absolutely. I mean, the through line around why do we read poetry is because it's what makes us human. And that empathy that comes from reading, that empathetic act, or maybe that empathetic shout of being a writer.
There's that great line, William Carlos Williams, I'm sure you know this line, that it's hard to get the news from poems, but men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there.
I don't know that phrase, but that belongs on at least a T-shirt. That's exactly right.
Isn't that right?
Isn't
that right? And
so we're in a moment in America right now where censorship isn't just about the First Amendment. It's about erasure. It's about going after different communities. It's about going after our neighbors, and it's really naked right now. Whether it's about pick your minority population, the majority is very uncomfortable, and the fact that what you're doing with both your own writing and with Narrative magazine and the Narrative for Schools project is retelling and reminding, I should say, that these stories matter. What kind of advice do you have right now for folks who care about the power of the word? What do you want to see America doing right now around that space?
If you go back to the beginning, at the end of the day, it was sitting around the campfire telling the story of the day. And all of us, no matter which side of whatever fence you want to put between us, when we come together at the end of the day, we tell the story of our day. And it's how we know what has happened to us and who we are. And it's not someone's story that we need to be afraid of. We need to hear each other. We need to hear each other's stories. And that quickening of the heart, what I always say to folks who are just starting out writing, go to the places where you're most afraid. As a storyteller, go to those places and hold still, because that's where the good stuff lives. If something quickens my heart, it's going to quicken your heart, you, the reader, and in the same way, we can't be so afraid of our story, our greater story. I mean, it is who we are. One of the oldest themes is man's inhumanity to man. I mean, that's where storytelling begins. Look at the Bible. Look at Homer. I mean, it is essential to. It's not like we have become worse human beings. We are just we have all the shades of of humanity and inhumanity, and that is possibility. So I think when one stands outside of story, it becomes a frightening thing, outside of certain kind of stories. But when you get inside the story and you see someone else's humanity, you see someone else's experience. I think of James Baldwin's Sonny's Blues, and it is such a complex story about two brothers. One is an algebra teacher and one is a junkie. And the brothers have a rift because the school teacher brother doesn't really want to deal with this loser brother. It's much more complex than that. I'm simplifying. But you get into the story and you are inside the struggle for both men and what the incredible forces pushing against them to fail. And Baldwin was really smart in writing that story that invited a white reader in to really talk about race relations while not pointing the finger. And that's what great storytelling has to be. It has to say, "Come here, I've got a story to tell you." And while you're inside the story, you're going to forget what people's skins look like, what their beliefs are. They're going to be just people. They're going to be just folk. There's a great line in Jane Eyre, of all stories, that I always think about. It goes, "We entered the wood and wended homeward." And what that line means to me as both a storyteller and someone who publishes stories is a book, a story promises, "I'm going to take you to a place that is unfamiliar and maybe even scary and maybe even a little dark, but I'm going to hold your hand and I'm not going to let go." And if the story is successful, you're going to end up in a place that feels like connection, that feels like home.
Carol, I have to say, unsolicited here, you must be a hell of an editor. Seriously, I'm not going to belabor the point. Your insights here today are just. I know you're a good editor. I've never seen you at work before, but just this conversation alone.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, Carol, we are at time, and we've covered quite a bit of ground from Vera and the 1906 earthquake and her story of resilience. The idea that no good crisis should go unexploited, as it were.
Unexamined,
yes.
Without its story.
Yeah. And also, most importantly, for the folks who are watching and listening, Narrative Magazine and Narrative for Schools. I'm so glad that we could have this conversation today during Banned Books Week, and thank you for your insights.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
Real pleasure. Okay, what we always do here at Every Library Live is always wave at the camera, and then I put up the thing again, and then I talk to you in the green room.